Good morning, everybody. There will just be a few more minutes for making sure that everyone has a chance to sign in, and then we'll get started. As we're waiting for people to sign in, I'm going to just go ahead and get started, and a few more people will join us as I'm doing some housekeeping items. Welcome, everyone. Hopefully you all had a restful and enjoyable weekend. Today is the last of our live presentations for the Michigan Community Center Neighborhood Initiative Grant Program. And as we speak of it, as we move forward, it will be the Michigan Community Center Grant Program. So what we'd like you to do is, as you are coming in, there's two different functions you'll see at the bottom. One is obviously the chat function, and the second is questions and answers. And the chat function, if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and sign in and say who you are, just so we can capture and understand who's with us today, which would be wonderful. You just have to say your name, your title, and the organization you're with, or just your name and organization is fine. In addition to that, as we go through, we will not be having people be unmuted just because of the audience size is large enough. What we'd like to do is in the Q&A, please be able to put your questions in there. And then we have a couple people, Shannon Zoot and also Denise Flannery, who are on the call today, and they will be managing those questions. I will pause at different sections to be able to allow us to review those. Please know that it's not going to be possible to get through all of the questions today. Typically, what we've done is in the chat, though, you'll see there's an email address. This is where all questions are being sent. And throughout the week, we're gathering all those from last week and this week, and we're going to be creating the FAQ. So do not worry that if your question is one that someone else has already asked, it's helpful for us to be able to know the questions and clarity that needs to be able to be provided for you. So feel free to send those. There are specific questions that may be just for your organization. Feel free again to ask that in the chat function. But then afterwards, if it doesn't get answered specifically for you, please go ahead and send an email, and I'll be trying to respond to those this week. So I think that's all the housekeeping that we have right now. If we can, let's go ahead and move forward, Jason, with the slides for the next slide. So as you know, the reason we're all here today is that we are reviewing the $60 million Community Center Grant Program that was presented to all of us as an opportunity. The funding for this comes from the American Rescue Plan Act, the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. So if you see the two different acronyms throughout this process, either ARPA, ARPA, or the SLFRF, you'll know that those are funding streams from the federal government. As a result, there are pieces that you will see in this application that it's required that we ask certain things in the application to be able to meet those federal guidelines. In addition to this, this was done through the state legislators. They received the ARPA funding from the federal government, and then they made a decision to be able to believe in community centers and what that means for all of your communities to be able to be the heartbeat of understanding both what needs are and having people gather together. So this is an exciting time for those that are in the community center world to be able to see that this is a valuable piece that is the state legislators have put in place. They do have boilerplate and language is what it's called. And so as a result, there are pieces that we also have to ask in the application process to be able to answer to the questions that they were asking to be put into this as well. So again, in the grants, we will be supporting this through the Michigan Community Service Commission. My name is Jenna Holmes. I'm the executive director of the Michigan Community Service Commission. And the other people on the call are helping support this grant process as part of the team. So let's move forward. So let's start with what are the eligible spending categories, which is always important when you're reviewing a grant. The first is this can be for construction of new facilities and renovation. So both building new and renovating, and we'll talk about the distinction and how you make those decisions and what the grant will be looking for. But what's wonderful, it also allows you to acquire property and allows for planning design costs. Obviously, all the elements that come with construction, but also equipment. and facilities. And then also there's a section in here that allows for programming and the development of that programming. So moving forward, we just wanted to give you the timeline. You already know that the RFP was announced in June, on June 29th. We wanted you to begin before the holidays, begin thinking of this, identifying it. We put in these webinar processes, and then all of these will be recorded. We've had 3 different ones. In addition to that, there will be, like I said, there's a FAQ that's going to be provided, and also there's an eGrams webinar also that is available. All those recordings will be available to you on our website. We anticipate, and also, first of all, we anticipate the notification of awards is in October, but the deadline is August 31st. So we need the month of September, depending upon how many applications come through. It may be a quicker process, or we may be able to let you know that we needed to shift that date a little bit too on, but we're targeting at least to try and have everything wrapped up to let you know by October. And then obviously the implementation process gets started. A couple other key dates for you to know when you're planning is this. The way this is set up because of the ARPA funding is that it must be encumbered. That means it needs to be obligated by December 31st of 2024. So you, if you were selected, would need to be able to understand the full breadth of how you'll be using your funding. And before December 31st of 24, all those decisions will need to be made. And then your spend down of expenditures has to be by October of 2026. We're finding out from the federal government that we might have to shift that a little bit. And so it might be a little bit earlier of the final expenditures. But right now, we still are targeting that August 26th timeline. As we move forward, so let's start with the definition for this project of community centers. I do not like to read slides, but for this purpose, I am going to read this definition, which is a building or other place in which people may gather to receive support, services, and to participate in social, educational, recreational, and cultural activities. They've said in boilerplate that centers must be free and open to the community, and we're going to find what that means. But let's go back to that definition. So my background is such that I've been doing a lot of different things for a while, but there was a time period in my life I actually did support a community center. It was during that funding that, you know, some of you remember, the 21st Century After School Plus Community Center funding. And so as a result of that, community centers were being looked at as this hub of activities. What we found is the brick and mortar facilities, especially in rural, smaller towns, some of those went away. And instead it became places. The 21st Century funding encouraged schools, libraries, other places to be able to use their locations. It can be art centers, it can be museums, it can be a lot of different places, colleges, universities. These have become the community centers of today. And it's sometimes not just one location. Sometimes it is an actual bricks and mortar building. But as a result, what we want you to know is we're going to go through what are the types of things that need to be in it, but it needs to be thinking of those parameters that you see in that definition. So be asking yourself if you alone in your organization can be identified in some capacity as a community center, and or if you might want to partner with others that as together a collaboration, you are the community center for your community. Okay, let's move forward. The project goals, you can review these later, but really quickly, I started out with looking at community centers and their vital role. And like I said, the heartbeat of the communities, I think that's really important, but also looking how we strengthen communities, enhance services, looking at how we have activities and capital projects happening, looking to see how individuals of all ages are able to access and be supported with those resources. And obviously at the very end, we also have to track what are the outcomes, and let's start collecting that data collectively. Okay. So this is a slide that you need to think through and see if you check one of those boxes, because the question is, am I eligible, is what organizations are asking themselves. So there are different things you need to be doing to check off the box to see if you are truly eligible. So the entities listed on the top, are you one of those? We put other in on purpose for, just like I said, it could be that you are a library, but oftentimes that's associated with the local government. It could be a museum. It could be an art center. We recognize that it's taken on different forms. And so the reason for that other is there. As a result, you can identify if this fits for you. But if you look down below, if you are a for-profit, the hospitals, the trade associations, credit unions, insurances and trusts, et cetera, those are not entities. But I have heard from, for example, a couple businesses that have been doing some of these functioning and supporting this. So they can't be the receivers of the grant. But if they want to be the supporter of some of these pieces, working with an entity in your community to be able to allow that grant to come to fruition, that is a possibility. Move it forward. So what are some different grant requirements? So we've spoken of that and here's some boxes that you have to check, and you have to speak to the fact that yes, on the application, you can answer yes to these. So do you offer it at no cost and open to the community? This is a very challenging thing because funding models for almost all of you, there's a piece of it that oftentimes you'll have a class or you're renting a room out for a cost or whatever. So every single element of what you do does not have to be free and open to the public. In addition, some of you might have there's different entities that have a very nominal membership fee. And that's just to be able to have a particular programming. If it's a large membership fee and that is your funding model to be able to allow your organization to operate, then this might not be the right one for you, but I will clarify that with you individually. But for those of you that have a nominal membership fee and or classes or other things that do cost, you need to say if in fact people can enter it without being designated that you can't walk through the doors because you aren't with a particular religious group, for example, or you aren't part of a particular sect of entities that exist in that definition. As a result, it has to be open to the community. And also you have to look for ways that you can have some of your programming at no cost. You have to demonstrate that there's negative impact of COVID-19. That's just the deal breaker. You have to be able to speak of that about your community. You also have to be able to state that you have compliancy with both state and federal regulatory entities. You have to be demonstrating they're financially stable. And if you are a 501c3, you are able to apply, but you do have to be able to show that you're certified as a 501c3. Moving forward. Here's another area for eligibility. They have to check at least one of these boxes, but it could be more. The more breadth that you show that you're able to provide the needs of the services of your community, the stronger your application may be. So again, there's after school program, career and workforce development, indoor and outdoor spaces, looking at programming for seniors, looking at meeting spaces of people coming together. And then there's a whole variety of different wraparound services that are there as well. All the way, it lists some particular things, but also think about food resources, et cetera. Those are wraparound type resources. Moving forward. So the boilerplate language also provided some language about a priority. So at least 50% of the awards that are selected by Leo must be for individuals or organizations, communities that are serving communities below the average median income. What we've done in the grant is there is a link right there that you can actually just click on the link and you can identify the communities that you serve if in fact that they fall below that median income level. But if you do not have your communities do that, it doesn't mean that you must. It just means that this allows you to fall in that 50%. So at least 50% must. In addition to that, when we look at this as far as individuals that are functioning, unfortunately, under-resourced, ALICE population, the Poverty Task Force has come up with some recommendations for individuals living in poverty and what we can do to support. And then also some of your organizations are supporting the ALICE population. We will be asking throughout the grant, do you provide support in any capacity? And we are looking for organizations that are supporting people have access to these resources and services. Next. So let's look at the application review process. There will be a point scale that we're going to provide to you, but just again, broadly for you to know what will some evaluative components be. First is there needs to be some community support for your plan. It doesn't mean that you've done a whole brainstorming session. You could have done a strategy session with your community. It could be that there's letters of support or other things from partners, et cetera, that demonstrate that. Obviously meeting community need, outlining clearly your goals, but your costs also have to align with the number of people you serve. So if you're asking for a $2.5 million grant and you only serve 10 people, that doesn't align quite as well as is needed. We are also looking, since this is going to have capital projects with both renovation and or new, for you to be thinking about energy audits. There are a lot of different funding streams that are happening for individuals and organizations that are coming from the federal government. And by us attempting to support you with having an energy audit, you could actually identify ways that you could update your equipment, your facility, so long term you actually reduce your cost to maintain your facility, and also be supporting on a more global scale as well. Obviously, you have to be timely. You have to be thinking about your sustainability, what happens afterwards. We are looking for you to leverage additional funds. We are going to be asking about cultural competency or the DEI component. It doesn't mean you have to have everything all together, but this could be an opportunity for you to explore what are you doing to make sure that you're open and accessible. And then we've already talked about the last two. So let's move forward. Financially. So we are going to encourage a blending of funding sources is what we're calling it. So we are looking for projects that have asked for, and it could be for your own organization, that you're providing staff time, in-kind support. What does that look like? What is it that you're putting into this project to make sure it's successful? But we also are going to look to see if there are other funders that are providing support of this project. You'll see in a minute what the upper limit is. For some of your projects, it is not going to be sufficient for your full project. So you are going to have those. We are not asking for a specific match. Those of you that have done federal grants before, sometimes with federal grants, they'll say you have to have at least a 25% match, a 50% match, 75%. We're not putting a stipulation on that. We want you to identify what does that look like for you to have blending of funding sources. And again, remember I said it can be resources in kind. One of the other things to know, please go back one more thing, Jason, is a key point there. The third bar there is you need to understand that if you have received ARPA funding in the past, you cannot receive ARPA dollars for the same project. A good example of a distinction would be some of you might have been a nonprofit that received Michigan Nonprofit Association funding, the M&A Relief Fund that they oversaw, and that was through Leo as well. But if you received that funding, yes, this will be able to be, because it's a separate project. But if you receive funding to actually be able to renovate, build a building, whatever, we're going to have to talk about that, because your project is going to have to be a different phase or a different specific element. You cannot receive funding for the exact same thing you've done before. And that's going to be critical, because you don't want to have any of that payback. And obviously you have to demonstrate capacity. So let's move to the two different types of grants that Jason had up. There are two different types of grants you can apply for. You can choose to go for just a program grant. Program grants have nothing to do with capital. You're not building, you're not renovating, you're not getting the big equipment for your building. You are looking at a specific thing. We've identified youth activities, community activities, and community support services, but you may have a completely different idea for a program grant that you can consider. The capital grant is for new construction, remodeling. Like I've said, you can purchase land. There can be design. I've mentioned those before. I've listed some of the things under remodeling and updating existing structure that could potentially be in this. Please look at the top. The minimum grant is $150,000. The maximum is $2.5 million. You have the ability to apply for both a program grant and a capital grant. But if you do both and you check both of those boxes, you cannot go beyond $2.5 million. So for an organization, you may not go beyond $2.5 million in your request. Moving forward. So the award distribution process is something that oftentimes people ask, to what level will we be giving out these different grants? So one of the things to look at it here is it does not mean that we will only give 14.6 million in programming and this other 43.9 million for the capital. We just wanted to have some areas as far as for us to start with. Based upon the grants that are going to be coming to us, as a result, this is going to allow us to be able to be flexible and meet the needs that you are presenting to us. Let's move forward. Okay, we're going to start with the application process, but before I get into that, Shannon, could you share with us if there's any questions, or Denise, are there anything right now that you think we need to identify?
Yeah, just a couple. I saw that a few just came in as you were asking that, so I'll look at those next, just for those of you who just submitted some questions. But a couple to ask you now. you said that services have to be free and open to the public. Does that mean they have to be free forever, or is there a certain time period during which they need to be free?
During the time, for example, if let's say it's probably a little easier just to speak of the program grant to give you an example. If you are asking for funds for a particular program and you want to implement that program, you can't then actually then ask for money to be able to make money off of that. Does that make sense? So as a result, during the time that you're receiving the grant funds, whatever you do in the future, you can do whatever you need to do. That is fine. But even with the both program and capital grants, this is where a lot of those specific questions for your organization that I might be able to help you with when we get into the emailing back and forth, because let's say you want to put in a new flooring and you have a rec, maybe there's a gym in your facility. Well, maybe you charge a rec fee for that, but you have to identify, is there ever a time that that gym floor is used in some capacity that's free? And more than likely, I bet yes. So you need to be able to identify ways that your facility or your program is free. You could not, for example, say that your program is free and then you're going to charge everybody for it and one person comes to the program that's free. That is not a good cost analysis basis there. Does that help?
Yeah, all right. And then will organizations who are traditionally titled a community center in name, will they be given additional consideration over those who are not?
Yeah. Well, again, what we have to recognize is we're going to be looking at geographic boundaries also. And so we want to make sure that there's representation throughout our state to make sure that some of those areas that are rural that do not have the brick and mortar of a community center in their name, we want them to be able to have the same amount of access to this as others and to make sure that distribution occurs. So we would not say that only if it's in your name that you will get it over the others. But what I would say is that you have to define, obviously those that have it in their name, they've defined themselves as a community center. They have thought about that breadth of services. If you are serving that function, you might have to, again, remember how I described that before, collaborate, and you're going to have to demonstrate that you do live out providing support services to your community.
Okay, I think that's it for now, Jen. I'll
Okay.
do the rest of
Okay.
them.
So let's move on to the application process. So the application process is all going to be done through eGrams, and we'll review that in a second what that looks like, but there's some things that you need to start doing right away. So some of you that have done federal systems and grants, you already know this, that there is something called the System for Award Management Number, SAM. So you have to have the SAM number and it leads to your unique identifier, entity identifier number as well. So you need to go in, you need to register. There's a link there. If you do not know what you need to help and work with your organization to see if, in fact, if you do have this, you need to update it. Oftentimes you have to do that. And also you have to have what is your EIN number. So these are the federal numbers that you need to have. And then let's look at the state. The state, this is a reimbursable grant. And so for you to be able to receive those fundings, you have to be registered in what's called SIGMA. And so you are actually becoming a vendor is what it's called. There's a link there that you will get a SIGMA number. And so you will in your application be listing that as well. Beyond that, all of this is going to go through an online application system. It's called eGrams. And so there's a link there. We do have a webinar specifically helping you know how to go through that to sign up in eGrams. And so that's the state requirement of how you apply. If we move forward. When you look at eGrams registration, obviously, like I said, you start out with your website. You're going to get a user profile. You need to find the actual application, the community center application. Some of you may have through DHHS use eGrams. You need to understand you need to go into the Leo. And so that is why it has its own unique website, as you see there, to get into Leo's eGrams. And then one of the things we're doing is we're providing a Word document for you that has all of the questions that you will have to be answering in this. We highly recommend that you use that Word document. You answer everything there because then it allows you in the system to just copy and paste and put it in there. The system does time out after every 15 minutes if you haven't completely responded to everything. And so as a result, this allows you to not lose your work as well. And then you have to, once again, submit your application by 5 p.m. on August 31st. Okay, move forward. Now I'm going to take you through 3 steps of this application process. To allow for those of you that are thinking of doing both a program grant and also a capital grant, we didn't want you to have to fill out 2 separate grants and repeat the same information twice. So what you'll see in step 1 and step 2, all of you, if you're applying, will have to do. So let's look at application step 1. This is going to allow us to do that very first review to say, are you eligible? Which is a question you're all asking as well. So I've just broken down the information that you see here to allow you to visualize it. So it's going to ask some pretty basic application information that you see listed there. It's going to ask you about your project information as well. One of the things you'll see in there, it self-populates the community center grant as your project name. We want all of you to select what name you want to call this project. And then also your start and end date, how much money you're asking for, and then also who are your contact individuals. Those of you who are applying to this, we want you as the applicant, whoever it is, you get to go all the way through, but we'd also like you to make sure that your authorized officials in there, and oftentimes is your CEO, but we would like your CEO and also your business or finance director to be listed in there too. They do not have to go through the whole process, but we would like you to be able to offer that information. We will ask you some demographic information, like obviously what counties you're serving. There's a drop-down box for these. There's state legislators, federal legislators. There's drop-down boxes. You have to just click a bunch of boxes here. And then like I said, you're going to get into some eligibility information. Some of these things are going to be just checking boxes that you acknowledge that you have in the very first section. It's going to give an overview of the grant program. At the very bottom, there's a box that says, yes, I acknowledge that I understand that this is what I need to do. And then from there, you're going to then be listing, do you have a nonprofit status? And you're going to be asked to upload your certification. If you're not a nonprofit, it doesn't apply to you. You then also have different criteria, and it's going to ask you, you have to have one or two of the first, and then additional criteria will be listed there as well. So this first step helps you and us know if in fact you are eligible to be considered to go forward. So let's move to the next step. Application step 2, you see I'm a real color coder. So this step 2 is all going to be in gold as you look at the slide deck. So you're first going to start with your organizational capacity. What we've done too is we put point scales with this. There is a handbook that we also have provided for you in addition to the application. Please know that handbook, we are going to be aligning this point scale as we go forward. And so please know there's a few updates I still have to make on that. But right now, this slide deck is allowing you to know the point scale. So what is your organizational background? It gives you all the different things you need to be putting in there. Your staff roles, who's going to be part of this project. You have to be thinking about your compliance and accountability. Federal grants need you to be able to state that you will be following through with the monitoring, the oversight, and the mitigation of risk. You actually have to state that you can and you've had the ability to do so. And then the last section of this is the data collection piece of this. The other part of step 2 is community need and engagement and impact. So what are the needs? What is the project impact that you're intending to have here? So you're going to have to describe, again, remember the federal government asked you to be able to describe what is the negative impact because of COVID. How about the community economic need? This is the section that we have checked that this is going to be meeting as a community economic need. So we have to have elements there, and the impacts, the demographic access. So remember I talked about geographics is important. Who are your beneficiaries? How are people having access to your center and services, and support of the poverty task force? And the last part is what kind of input and partnerships do you have? So did you have stakeholder engagement? Remember I referenced that before. Strategies and welcome the community to your center, project partners again, so that we can see collaboration. This is the section where it's really important. These last 2 sections is, are you seeing yourself as a community center? Are you collaborating in a way that you're meeting the needs and you're understanding how to do so? And then the last step of step 2 is this. You will be making a decision if you're going to go for a capital grant or a program grant. So again, you can select one of these, and then what it will do is it's going to open up all the questions you have to answer for a program grant, and or it'll open up the questions you have to answer for the capital. If you check both, then both of those pieces of questions will be there for you for that section. Okay. So I'm going to pause here again before we get into the details of those 2 types of grants. Are there any other questions right now, Shannon, that's coming forward?
There are a lot of questions. I am still working on sorting through all of them. One that you might get to later was about the cost reimbursement system. Do you know how often cost reimbursement will occur? They don't have to have the full amount of their grant available
No,
at the beginning
no.
and wait till the end to be reimbursed.
No, you do not. And so I have a meeting set up with our finance person who's going to oversee the project, and I'll find out what that schedule looks like. So I will put that in the FAQ. But yes, typically what you do is you have a cost, you're able to invoice it, where you submit it, and that's how the process works. You do not have to have all the money up front and then wait to the end of the grant to be able to reimburse.
And then there's a lot of questions about specific eligibility things, specific things that might qualify or not qualify. So I've just been responding to everyone to please send their specific questions to that email address, and somebody is monitoring that inbox and will respond to you individually and, you know, ask any questions or have a conversation about your specific circumstances. Is there anything else you want to say about that, Jenna?
No, again, as Shannon said, sometimes you actually have to present your situation to me to understand it, and that would be a lot of situations right now in this webinar. So that's why it's a challenge. So think about your project, but again, think of it this way. Think of all those places I said you have to check those boxes. Do you check those? The next thing is, what is the service that you're offering? So a lot of eligibility questions I had over the weekend were surrounding around the cost. Hopefully you see that there is some definite wiggle room, that you do not have to have this be completely free in everything you do. You have to demonstrate how you are offering an openness for people to come to use services at no cost. So that is what you do need to be able to present. But beyond that, your funding stream, you couldn't keep your doors open if you didn't have some other money coming in. Typically, there's this whole business plan that they say that you have to be able to do and have. But in addition to that, if let's say you're doing just, I'm going to pick one, after school programming. After school programming is one of those boxes that you must have one or more of these, remember? So you've met that criteria. But if the only thing you do is after school programming, where do you do that? That may be done in the school building. If that school facility also is open and free for people to, you know, sometimes older adults, I'm in that category, they like to walk the hallways of a school building, or they have recreational facilities they get to use at no cost. There are other ways, and sometimes classes or meeting space. So if the place that you're holding your after school programming, you might want to partner to make yours stronger, which is a question that was asked earlier. Am I truly a community center? So you need to think, is your after school program a community center, or are you a programming element that meets one of those criteria, but yet you work in partnership to be able to meet the needs and the services for your community? So again, please make sure you send those questions. I'll help you work through those. Sometimes it might even be a phone call that I have to hear a little bit more, ask some more questions, but I'll answer as many as I can through the email system.
Okay, just
Anything
a couple
else,
more I
Shannon?
grabbed while you were answering that one. In terms of people served, will rural areas be competitive with urban areas?
Yes. So that is why I mentioned that before, is that we need to make sure that there's representation throughout our state. And obviously a big component of our state is rural. So again, you need to be able to present, again, what is, and rural oftentimes does know what your community needs are. You're able to tell that story just as compelling as if you're in the urban environment, you do as well. So the answer to that question is yes. Another question that some people have asked, and it might be there, is, let's say you ask for the $2.5 million, and there's so many grants that come in. Is it possible it is an all or nothing? And so that might even be one of those things that we're examining, that instead of you getting the full amount, could there be a partial grant? And then you will have that a decision to make if in fact you want to receive these funds or not, if it's not a full grant award. Anything else, Shannon?
And last one before we move on, are organizations allowed to use a fiscal fiduciary?
Possibly. And the reason I say possibly is I would like to hear more about it as far as what the capacity is, because if you are doing a capital project, and so as a result, you're buying land or you're wanting to remodel a facility, who owns that? Does your fiduciary? Who has a responsibility on that? So the reason I'm not saying yes for a fiduciary outright is because we do need to hear what it is that you're going to have the fiduciary for, and what are they signing up for. So let's talk about that. There have been, like, our impact grants through Leah, we have allowed fiduciaries. So please know that it's not me saying that it is not allowed to have a fiduciary. We just need to make sure that it fits, and to make sure, especially if you're getting a capital grant, that it truly fits that fiduciary having responsibility for that.
Thanks.
Okay.
And just a reminder, everybody, I'll put the email address in the chat again. And then if you could put your questions in the Q&A instead of in the chat, then they won't get lost.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right, let's move forward. We're going to then now outline the program grant and then the capital grant, and this might answer some of your questions. So in step 3, I'm going through the different sections that are there in the program grant. So first of all, you just have to describe your program, and you see there's a certain number of points that are associated with this, clearly describing it, what is the effect of the support, and how it's going to support a significant community problem, identify how the program is aligned with best practice. So those are the pieces. So this is your way to tell that story of the program. What do you want to accomplish? What is it going to look like? Next, Jason. So what is the intervention? How can this intervention lead to the desired outcomes? What does that look like for you and for your program? And then the program design features, including reaching underserved, underrepresented, marginalized families and communities. So instead of just having one question that's really big, we broke that down into 2 sections. So think about describing the program and then also the intervention. I did not put any character limits on this, but please know, if you write 5 pages for each of those, that isn't necessarily going to help your case either. Please be succinct and efficient with what you say. But I also did not want you to be limited with you telling the story in one section of this, that you need to have the room to do so. Okay, next question. What is the community impact and also the beneficiaries? So when you think of the goals of the program, explain the community need and how it will make a difference in your community. Broadening on the design, and how is that appropriate for your community? Why are you choosing this piece? Describe the project and how it does provide to support community specific needs of the community that it serves. And when we're getting into beneficiaries, it's what we talked about before too. It's all wrapping in. So you're going to see that it gives you time to fully describe these things beyond what you've already done so far, which is, who is it going to support? Is it going to be for youth? Is it going to be for all ages? Identify those different ages and the demographics. Make sure, again, you look at the people in poverty and Alice population. The reason we say that is because part of this is to be able to raise people up and deal with the economic issues that were impacted because of COVID. We need to weave that as part of your story, because that's how it does align and is appropriate for these federal funds. We have to tell that story. So please know that's why you keep seeing this coming back in. Next question. There is something called the program blueprint. And so what this allows you to do is you then think, okay, what are the objectives of this program? We anticipate there's probably going to be more than one objective. What is the activity? It has a little chart, which is nice. You know, who's going to be doing it? What's your timeline? What's your date range? What are your outcomes? What are your measurements? So this is a way for you to give an overview, a summary of all those things, but again, in a very succinct way, in a table format that you can then identify what is your blueprint for this program. And next is your outreach plan. Because it's a program, it may be an expanded program, maybe an existing program, but because there are federal dollars here, we want to make sure that we hear and see from you, what is it that you're going to be to do to communicate this? The one thing to know too is, you're going to hear me say this in the budget, is we should not, for the very first time in your budget, be hearing and seeing that you want to spend money on something that you have not identified. This allows you to speak of a marketing, advertising, outreach, whatever that is, your website development. This allows you the ability to put some funds in for that too, but then make sure that you're describing that whole breadth of what you're going to do in that communication plan. And then I think the next is the last one, which is sustainability, sorry. Before we get to budget, is how are you going to sustain this program? How are you going to maintain this investment? And then also I'm going to talk about volunteer support. So for A and B, what I want you to think about is, it may be that you're doing a pilot project. And so as a result, you're going to pilot it and you might adjust and shift, and then you're not sure if you're going to sustain it forever for a program. But yet our hope is that the goal is for you to be able to look at the community need, identify that this is a solution, and then what's your program to meet that need. And so as a result, we would hope that this would be continuing and allowing other people to do so as you go forward beyond the funding stream. So what would that look like? And so sustainability is a key piece here. And the C element of sustainability is volunteer support. Many of you all know that you would not be here without volunteers of being able to be part of this whole scheme of things. So what is your volunteer recruitment management support plan? The commission has resources to help support you in this, but volunteer. And so we say there's people power for sustainability and also financial elements for sustainability. So make sure that is all part of your sustainability plan. And then I think this is the final piece of this is your budget. So we've listed some elements that you can, yes, you can put salaries in this, benefits that go with those salaried people of what that would look like. When you do list these, you have a program budget, which gives your overall numbers, and then your narrative, you can't just say, I want $10,000 for supplies. You have to identify what that would be. And as silly as it sounds, if you've done federal grants, you'll know this, you have to actually say that it's for copy expense and such amount per page, or whatever it is, the supplies that you're doing, right? What is it that you're, the mailings, how many mailings? If you're going to do trainings, there's going to be so many trainings that you do at a certain cost for that individual who's presenting the training. Let's say you bring an outside contractor in to be able to do your trainings for you and present classes or whatever that is. And then obviously the advertising dollars I've already spoken of. You can have contracted services in this as well. And then we put technology in as well, because a lot of this for you needs to be also be able to streamline, and technology can allow you to do so. I think that was our last one for the program grant, and except for the fact that I want you to know is make sure that you certify before you submit. One of the things we found in the impact grant, Denise and I, in this is at the very end, and I know I've written many grants too, sometimes it comes down to crunch time. It's August 31st, it's 4:49, you're really excited, you've got everything in, you hit the button, and then when you go and it says you haven't certified, you go to certify and it tells you have a whole lot of errors. So you're scrambling, trying to figure out, can you get all those errors fixed before that 5 o'clock p.m.? What we'd like you to do is make sure that you're going through and updating. It's not just saving, you're making sure that at the very end, save time in this to give yourself enough time to certify, because that's the last piece of this. Now, Shannon, is there anything in particular about program grants we need to address before we move on to capital?
I don't think so. I think we answered most of the questions in the Q&A in the chat.
Okay,
so I think
great.
we can move on to capital.
Okay, so let's move into capital, and then we'll, I think we're going to have some time that we can have general questions if needed. So once again, this is step 3 for capital grant. So when you're in step 3, you choose program and capital, or program or capital, but let's just say that you've chosen just a capital. So in this section, this project description, it's 20 points, it's pretty broad, which is what is your description, the impact, what is it that the programs that will be offered as part of this capital project, and the beneficiaries who's going to be able to support that. What are the objectives and activities that you're going to have to be able to have for your project? So these are things I've already described a little bit already in the program grant, so it's similar type of questioning, but I did want to look at question 5 and 6. One of the things that is stated in the ARPA funds is that if you have a capital expenditure, you have to explain why you're choosing new as opposed to remodel. One piece that is written is that it says that you actually have to have some estimates so you can actually compare it. I did receive federal guidance that says that you do not have to have an architect that shows every element and have all the schematics for your remodel versus the new. You do have to have someone be able to put through an estimate. It doesn't have to have 3. You can have one that says, we reviewed our building. These are the reasons, this is the need, this is what the number of people we need to serve, this is why this building does not function in this way, or this is the reason why we cannot bring this building up to code to be able to do what is necessary for the programming element. This is why we're choosing to go over here instead be new. They are looking for buildings that already exist to be used. It doesn't mean that you get more points if you do remodel as opposed to new, but we have to make sure that for your particular project that you do define the reasons why is the point. And then also when you get to number 6, it does ask for a comparison of capital expenditures. It is a federal grant. So ultimately, if you receive a grant, you do have to have the 3 different quotes. As you always know that there's this magic number of 3 to be able to say in comparison why you chose the one that you did. This is a really good question that's come up in the first two webinars, and I've received guidance is by August 31st, you do not have to have your 3 quotes together. For some of you, you may just begin this process of reviewing and identifying. One entity said that they were actually going to be doing stakeholder input to determine if, in fact, what it was that they're going to be doing, and they will not be able to have that done by August 31st and all of their quotes done. So you're not necessarily in your project. You can use this for design work, but you do need to have a number. You can't just have it be that, well, I want to design and later I'll tell you how much money it is. So if you want to be considered for $2.5 million or $1 million, there has to be an estimation of what it is. For example, what is the size, and we'll talk about that in a second, of your scope list, the size of your facility, and what is the estimated per square foot that you anticipate. So if you do have your schematics, that's great. If you don't, you still can be considered. What we'll be doing is your application will be considered with everyone else. If you are selected, we will give you a certain amount of time after being selected that you will then have to have all of that put in as far as your 3 quotes, also as far as your schematics, what everything looks like, all that done. If in fact, during that process, you choose, we can't do it, the community's not supporting it, we can't get the full amount, the bids came back twice as much as we thought, we can't get the support, we feel horrible, but we're going to have to give this grant back, and then that may have to happen. So know that that's still a possibility, but I want to make sure that you feel comfortable. For those of you that are still in your design phase, we would like as much as you can done by August 31st, and you do need to make sure that you're in comparison to the other grantees that are out there to make sure we fully understand your project. Moving forward. So in this section, you're going to choose, is it going to be new construction, yes or no? And then there's a scope list, renovation information, yes or no, and the scope list. What your scope list is like I said, in new construction, it should be the size of the facility. Are you having recreational elements in there? Are you doing, let's say, a renewable energy in your whole facility, and your whole building is going to be that way? You're going to have renewable energy outside. So think of what the scopes are, what you could do for new. The same thing for renovation. We're going to remodel the bathroom. We're going to be doing the kitchen. We're going to be, we have a old gymnasium. We took over an old school, and that floor, it can't be used. And so we need to be putting a new gym floor in, whatever that is. So you're going to have your scope list, and you do have to have some cost associated with your scope of what you're doing. And then again, it gets into maintaining the investment. How are you planning to maintain the investment? You can't just build or remodel and then we can't have, this is what the federal government is going to ask us to do. And so you need to be able to make sure it's in your story, which is how will you maintain this if this money is invested in this project? If you are doing any type of work, obviously you have to look environmentally. Is there going to be any negative environmental impact, and how you address that? Are there any environmental challenges there? And then also the same thing we discussed earlier, which is the sustainable model of volunteerism. So what is your volunteerism, recruitment, management? It can be what you're already doing, but then based upon, let's say you're doubling in size. Well, what would your anticipation that you would need to do to be able to manage? And part of keeping your building open maybe with volunteers. So please make sure that you identify that. Next slide. Okay, now this gets into the clarity of the scope. This gets some target dates. If you do have a site development plan, you're going to upload it. Maybe it's just, again, almost like how you've seen in the movie, there's a napkin and someone's kind of put some things down on paper. You need to be able to present something of what is it that you're hoping to do. You do have to have a licensed architect. You do have to have a fair process of choosing it. The goal would be the licensed architect can help you through this whole clarity of scope. So this is probably, if you haven't thought about this, this would be one of those things that you would want to be looking at to see is there someone, maybe there's a skilled volunteer architect that can help you start this whole process to get things in for the grant. And then as a result, then the architect fees can be paid if you do receive it. We talked about contaminations. There are permits that are required. This is what your architect is going to be able to help you with. Have you selected a construction company? If so, then you have to say the process. If you haven't, then what will be your fair process that you do to be able to be selecting them? What are the plans if you have them, uploading that? And then also, if you have property ownership, you need to be able to upload that you do have, and there are forms and templates that you can use for most of these different things as well. I am getting guidance right now because a few people have asked, is it possible for us to do a capital project and to say that we're leasing it? That I do not have guidance back yet. And so please, if that is one of your questions, know that hopefully within this week, I will have that answer as well. Next page. Also, because you're doing renovation and construction, then accessibility for people of all abilities. The first section is obviously getting some feedback. There's different suggestions in what you can do there, and also asking for some unique features of what you're doing to be making sure that your facility is accessible to all. So this is an important piece to making sure that access is there. And the next one is now let's look at your project budget. So once again, similar to what I said, you're going to have project budget categories and the narrative. So as you see, there are specific things I've already spoken of, all the way from planning to design, looking at equipment. You can, interestingly, you see programming here. Let's say you only do a capital project. You cannot do a brand new program, but programming here means for the events or what you're going to do to be able to activate your site. So how do you launch it? What does that mean? And so if there's a programming element to launch your site, then you can put some program dollars in. Administration fees here, there's some caps here on this too. So for your permitting, planning, design, over all that piece is capped at, can't be more than 25% of what you're requesting. Administration, again, when you look at administration and or indirect or overhead costs, there's a couple different options here. You can have it, it's capped at 5% for the admin of the project. Now remember, it's not for your whole center. This is for the project. If you're managing this construction project from beginning to end. Typically, indirect and overhead is not something you'd be looking for as far as with this, because it's for the project, remember, the capital project. But we have listed this for both to allow you to know that this is there. And then the last piece is the project budget narrative, again, needs to be making sure that it's clearly outlined what you're spending the money for, not just lumps of sum of money. Okay. And one thing is there, it's true in all budgets that you're putting together for us, is make sure that it has to be cost effective. Again, make sure that description of what you're doing, it's not the first time anyone's seeing these things on your budget, and make sure your narrative allows for cost effectiveness and clearly allowing us to cross-reference those costs. Okay. And then the last is, once again, certify. Don't forget. And then let's move to our very last slide, which allows for some questions. Is there are resources. This is the website that is available. What we'll be doing, this is kind of our information source for you. Please know that we're learning a lot as far as questions, and we're trying to be responsive as possible. So we will have all of the webinar recordings. Like I said, there's the actual, the slide deck will be there as well as the actual Word document that you get to type in. I am working and doing some fine tuning on the handbook. So those of you that are really strong in doing all the comparison know the handbook is going to give you a little bit more detail, but I want to make sure that all of those things that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's on that yet. Email is listed. That's where you answer those individual questions. The application link again is here for you. And then, like I said, both a Word document as well as a handbook that will be there as well. FAQ, we are hoping by the end of the week, the FAQ will be up in there. We may post one that's a work in progress to be able to answer some of the questions for you. But to be honest with you, your questions, as I said when we began this webinar, is what is driving how we generate that FAQ. So Shannon, I'm going to come back to you to see, are there any other questions that have been posted?
Yes, I do have some questions for you.
Okay.
So quickly, to go back to the program grant, is it expected that the projects will be new, that it's for new projects, or can it be support existing projects?
It can be supporting existing, and think about a little bit of expansion or enhancing. So it doesn't have to mean that you're going to increase a lot of numbers, but you should enhance what you're doing. Another question had been asked earlier, can it be a brand new pilot project? The answer is yes as well.
Okay. And then could this grant be used to explore opening a community center in a community, like the research, feasibility, needs assessment? Yes.
Exactly. So
Okay.
your whole project grant, think about it from beginning to end, and then what you're asking money for would be to your stakeholder, to hire an architect, to hire the individuals, the planning, programming people to look at feasibility. And then also maybe there's a piece in there to help you look at the fund development strategies. You could actually do that whole piece. The challenge is if you want 2 years or a year for that, that will be too long for us to be able to also offer the funding to actually start your project. So as a result, you could use it it could be that you are choosing your land and as part of it. So you know that, you know where you want to go, but now you want to know what it's going to look like. And so as a result, you want the community engagement and that whole process and have all the people. And so you could be asking for just the planning pieces. Good question.
Great. Can you give an example of an event to activate the site? You said something about that.
Yeah, you could do it. For example, I would think you might want to do an open house or a series of open houses, or maybe you would even do a special little program that you're going to put out there that's part of an open house as an example of what people could do, right? So that people can see it, but it can't be a full-fledged program of what you're going to do you're going to launch your after school program. If you do that, then you need to have the program grant as well, funding. So and I don't think I mentioned this before, but just so that it's clear too, is if you're doing a program grant and you're doing a capital grant, both, even though you can't go above 2.5 million for your organization, the program will be against all program grants. The capital will be against all capital grants. So you will be in the running with both of those pieces, even though it's not a total, each one of those do not total individually as 2.5 million, but together they do. Okay.
Okay. And then, Jason, can you go back a slide? Somebody asked to clarify the final point on the last slide, probably the one before that.
Okay.
Make sure the budget is not the first time in activity for the programs as listed. I think that's what they're referring to.
Yes, if that's what you're asking about, is sometimes this happens, like you start developing your budget and you begin thinking about what am I going to spend the money on? But there's nowhere throughout the grant application that you've written about why you're doing that activity and why you're spending money on. So for example, if in fact you want to do something with website or technology or something like that, and that's critical, you need to make sure that in your program design that you speak of all of those elements. So you don't want to, for the first time, for us to find out that you want money, like I said earlier, on communications and advertising plan when you didn't even reference it before. So in some of those areas, I've actually asked the questions for you. So then it allows you to cross-reference it. But please make sure that you think about that and make sure that we know why you're asking for the money and what it is going to and how it's going to be put in place and implemented.
Okay. We answered this in the Q&A or in the chat, but I just thought I'd answer it for everybody in case you also have this question. If you are already using eGrams through MDHHS, you have to set up a new account and a new login with the Leo Department of Leo eGrams for this grant. Anything else about that, Jenna, that you would say?
Nope. Okay. I think that's good.
Okay, so I think we got the questions. I did see just a couple come in just now. I haven't even read through them yet. So I will encourage you to send your questions to the email address. I'll put it in the chat one more time for everybody. And then if there's anything else you want to say in closing, Jenna.
No, just in closing, thank you so much for your interest. This is going to be an opportunity, and that's what I'm hearing from people too throughout the state. This is an opportunity for an investment in people in your communities, and you know that better than anyone else, is what the needs are, and then also what are the solutions to help support. So one of the elements here is, yes, in fact, there's this grant program, but in addition, let's work together. Because Michigan Community Service Commission, actually, we say that we're conveners, connectors, and resource generators. So once we start hearing your ideas, and I'm anticipating there's not going to be, unfortunately, enough money for all the brilliant ideas that all of you have. So let's make sure that we understand what those are, and then how do we keep looking for funding to be able to meet those community needs. So this is going to be us together. If there's something that please know that our goal will be to answer questions you put in the email within 48 hours. I'm hopeful as we get in the rolling things, it'll be even quicker than that. But again, we will, and if you do not hear an answer, feel free to go ahead and request it again. Some people have been sending things directly to my email, and that might get into a big, huge email and I don't want you to get held up. So make sure if you put any questions for me and directly to me, please also put it in this, because I will be able to find them a little bit easier than in my thousands of emails over on the other section. So, well, thank you again, everyone, for your time. It's 11 o'clock. We like to end things on time. We appreciate, again, your ideas. Looking forward to hearing about your projects, and we will work with you as you go through it to answer your questions. Thank you so much.